Hi friends, this is Josh from musiclikeyoumeanit.com. Thanks for joining me for this next video in the From Start to Finish Metalcore series. Today I'm going to talk about cymbal reinforcement and how I'm using it in this mix. In the tracks from the drum session itself, I actually only get 3 microphones here that are really focused on the cymbal sound. That's going to be the stereo pair of drum overhead mics and then 1 mic on the hi-hat cymbals. This song is from a much older recording session that I pulled up recently and mixed again. When I pulled up the session files, I found that during the drum editing process, some cymbal samples have been placed through the mix here. This is one possible solution if you don't have enough microphones to actually record all of the effect cymbals on a kit. As you can see, if you look through the bell and splash track here, I've actually taken out some of the samples that were placed during the drum editing process because I found I was getting enough of those cymbals in the overheads themselves. In addition, the hi-hat mic was also cut up during the editing process, and only the portions where the hi-hat is playing are left unmuted here. Finally, the last track reinforcing the cymbal sound in my overheads is this crash sample track, which is a sample of both the far left and far right crashes in the session being played together. I'll step through each of these tracks to show you how I'm using them, and then also talk about why you might take this approach in a mixing session. To start with, let's look at the effect cymbal tracks here, which are the splash and the bell. Both of these tracks are not actually mixed very loudly in the song, but I'll show you what they're adding over here in a part of the song where those cymbals are played. First, let's start with the splash cymbal. I'll play this section of the track with the sample track in there, and then I'll mute it so you can hear what it's adding. You can hear that this is mixed pretty quietly, but it is giving some extra definition to the splash cymbal during this part. I didn't want these accent notes to pop out too much in the overall drum sound, but having the sample here does make them a little more clear. Let me also play that sample by itself so you can hear exactly what it's doing. I'm pretty sure that's just one sample, but it's been placed on every cymbal hit in the part. On the track itself, I just have the SSL channel strip with the EQ engaged, and that has the same high-pass filter that my main overhead track has. Whenever I'm adding cymbal samples into a mix, I try to make them emulate the overhead sound as much as possible so that they blend in a little bit better. It helps in this case that these samples were recorded during the actual recording session with the same cymbals and mics that were used in the rest of the song. In general, if you have enough microphones to do spot mics while you're recording, that can sound a little bit more natural than cymbal samples like this. But as a good backup alternative, when you don't have enough mics to do that, cymbal samples can help bring out the sound of accent cymbals in a mix that you can't hear as well in the overheads. This is something you can check on actually during the recording session itself. If you're having trouble hearing a splash, for example, you could check and see if the drummer has maybe a louder cymbal, or if it could be moved slightly closer to one of the overhead mics so that they pick it up a little better. At the end of the session then, if you listen back and it's still too quiet, it never hurts to take a few samples just in case you need them a little bit later to help fill in. The other track that's serving a similar purpose here is this bell track. It has the same EQ from the overheads again, which is just the high pass filter. And then let me show you a part where that's being played. I'll play this once with the bell track in, and then I'll take it out again. So you can still hear this bell even without the sample in there, but again, it's boosting the level just a little bit more to give us some more definition. The sample by itself, again, is just a single hit on that accent cymbal. And that actually brings up another good point about cymbal samples. Because taking samples after a session is much different than the process of actually recording the drummer playing a part, you can get really great sounding recordings, but sometimes they don't really match the part that the drummer is playing. For example, this bell sounds like it's hit perfectly and it rings out evenly through the entire decay of the cymbal. But when a drummer is moving around a drum kit, it's quite rare for them to hit a bell exactly right and then for it to be allowed to ring for the entire length of that cymbal's decay without being affected by other cymbals around it. That's just my caution that when using samples, it's important to listen with a critical ear in the context of the mix to make sure they still sound natural. Besides these two effects cymbal tracks, I do have the hi-hat track, which was recorded during the session with the real performance. I'm not quite sure what microphone was used here or how it was placed, but there's actually quite a lot of bleed in this track, so I'm not using very much of it in the mix. Let me play a section of the song that has some hi-hat, and then I'll toggle it on and off so you can hear what it's adding. If you're listening on headphones or studio monitors, you could probably hear a little bit of the difference that that's making, but it's really quiet in the mix here. Let me show you what the track sounds like by itself. Even that low in the mix, it is giving me a little more definition, but it's definitely not adding the majority of the hi-hat sound. Like I mentioned earlier, the track itself actually has a lot of drum bleed in it. So let me show you what it sounds like without any processing. Unfortunately, the snare drum sounds basically the same volume as the hi-hat here, and we even have some kick drum bleed. So I've done some processing to try and clean that up. I've taken out most of the low end here. I've got a high pass filter all the way up to 1K, and then I've cut a little bit more at 8K where it was sounding a little harsh. The other plugin on the track is the Cranesong Phoenix Tape Saturation, which I'm just using to tame some of the high end that was getting a little bit harsh after cutting all the body out of this track. So let me play that clip again and I'll turn these plugins on so you can hear what they're adding. You can hear how the EQ is helping remove that kick drum, and then the saturation kind of rounds out the sound of this track a little bit more. It's still not that great sounding, and I do have it pretty low in the mix as a result, because I was trying to get just enough to give me some more definition without having to color the sound of the hi-hats from my overheads too much, because I do like how they sound there. The final cymbal reinforcement track that I have here is the stereo crash track. Let me show you a part of the song where this is being used so that you can hear what it's adding. I'll play this part first with the track and then without it. Again, this is not super loud in the mix, but it does help add some energy at the start of this next part. While I don't always use cymbal samples in a mix, the stereo crash sample is a great one to capture during a session in case you need it later. It helps solve a couple common problems that I often run into when mixing heavier music like this. The first is that a lot of times the drum parts in metalcore and more technical heavy genres can be really fast, so even a very practiced drummer can have trouble getting to all the cymbals they need to during a part. This can result in the start of each section not necessarily having the push of energy that I want it to keep the momentum of the song going forward. During a session, you can try and coach a drummer to help them enter each part with the energy you're looking for, but depending on the arrangement, sometimes this is really hard to do. The other problem that this solves has to actually do with the drummer's actual kit setup. Some drummers in these genres play with more pared down drum sets, so they may be actually playing their ride cymbal as the farthest right crash on their kit. That cymbal is often the largest one on the drum set, so depending on how they're playing it during an actual groove, it might make the overall overhead image not sound as wide as I like, which makes the energy a little less exciting. This part of the song is a good example because the drummer is actually only getting to their left crash, So having this stereo sample where both crashes are played at the same time gives me that push of energy in a way we probably couldn't have done in the real session. Just for fun, let's take a look at another part where the sample is helping. This is right at the start of the pre-chorus, and you'll hear that again, only one of the crash cymbals is hit. I'll play the start of this section with and without this track so you can hear how much more energy it adds. Pardon the vocal delays there. So yeah, this track is really helping give me that stereo image that I'm looking for at the start of this section. And in turn, that really pushes the song forward into the next part. I do want to leave you with one last thing about how to take cymbal samples during a session. As I mentioned, these samples worked really well here because they were the same cymbals and the same microphone position as the overhead tracks that were recorded. In addition to that, if you make sure that the cymbals are placed in the same spot in the stereo image, it will help the sample blend better with the overheads because it won't feel like they're pulling the cymbal to one direction or the other as you add more or less of them. So that's the cymbal reinforcement I'm doing in this mix. If you've used cymbal samples in a mix before, leave a comment below and let me know what you've found to be helpful. Do you like to use stereo crash samples like this, or have you ever tried any other type of cymbal reinforcement to get a similar effect? Thanks again for hanging out with me today, everyone. Keep making great music, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.